Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. I personally have enjoyed the first two Conjuring films. I have not seen some of the spin off movies, like I know Annabelle has three films, and I think there's The Curse of La Llorona and things like that. Um, but in today's video, I am talking about the third Conjuring film. But in this film, you guys, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are the paranormal investigators from the first two films, that they took on a real life case that this film is based on a true story of about a young man who claimed that this demonic presence took over his body at one point. There was a almost exorcism with this little boy that basically he was related to in some way, and so basically through a series of events, this guy was able to kind of get rid of this demonic spirit that was in this young boy, and but as a result, the evil spirit got passed on to him, and this wasn't known right away. And so basically, as the film progresses, uh, something agitates this young man, and it agitates this evil spirit as well, and it basically causes him to commit murder. And so throughout the course of the story, they get a hold of Ed and Lorraine Warren again, and basically they're trying to figure out what exactly can we do. Obviously, he was not conscious when this murder took place, and how are we going to go to Supreme Court and basically find a way to basically win the case through demonic possession and things like that. So basically, over the course of this film, Ed and Lorraine Warren do some investigation. They look into the house. They look into basically what kind of evil spirit entered this home and things like that. Where the ghost came from, how it went on to this little boy, eventually went on to this teenager, and what exactly can they do to basically win this case, if there is a way to win this case about demonic possession. So overall, guys, I liked this new movie, the Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. I will say right off the bat, it is probably the least scariest of the three Conjuring films. But I will say this, I think the first Conjuring film is obviously the best. The second film is good. I thought the case in that film wasn't as interesting, though. And the third film, even though the scares are definitely much weaker, I thought the case itself was more interesting than what they did in the second movie. So basically, long story short, the first film's the best. Second film is good, but the scares are much better than they are in the third, but the case is not as interesting. The third film has a more interesting case, but the scares are not as good. So basically, the second and the third film would have benefited from something that both of those films don't have, and vice versa. There's things that those films have that either film would have benefited from. So that's kind of my view on these three Conjuring movies. But back on the third one, yeah, like I said, I like this film. There's things I'm going to go over here in my positives and negatives of why I like it and certain parts I didn't like about it. But overall, I enjoyed this movie. I thought the case was more interesting, and um, I thought this film probably would have benefited from more scares, obviously. But for the most part, I enjoyed what I was watching while watching this movie. So for my positives and negatives of The Conjuring 3, like I said, this was an interesting paranormal case. Really, I really can't think of a lot of other cases where someone went to court and pled not guilty based off of demonic possession. So I thought that aspect in and of itself was interesting, and kind of the research they had to do to figure out what exactly this ghost came from and things like that was all interesting as well. So they found an interesting case to make a movie about. Um, there's just enough differences to make it feel different from those first two Conjuring films. It really is a kind of a very different case than those first two Conjuring films. So I thought that aspect in and of itself was very interesting. We also do kind of briefly get to hear some of the real tape recordings of the case back when this young boy was possessed by that demon before it passed on to the older young boy. And it was very creepy stuff. It was one of those things where I was looking to the friend of mine who I was watching this film with, and I'm like, that was kind of the creepiest part of the movie, is this hearing what was going on in this real exorcism, and kind of hearing the ghost speak from the little boy's body and things like that, and hearing the parents kind of freaking out about this spirit taking over their son's body and things like that. Like that was actually really creepy stuff. And so I thought that aspect of the film, when they're showing that in the end credits, was very creepy and very effective, and kind of interesting that Warner Brothers got a hold of that to be able to use that in the movie. So I thought that aspect was very interesting. We also kind of get to see Ed and Lorraine Warren as fully developed characters this time. We've now had several films now of using them. I believe they even show up in one of the Annabelle films at one point. So we have at least 4 films, if not more, of the Ed and Lorraine Warren characters. And it really goes to show, because they really do feel developed this time. I feel like we kind of personally know the characters pretty well at this point in the franchise. That they're very well developed. They have flaws. They have strengths. They have ways to kind of take on cases now that are really kind of their strong suit, and there's certain things in certain cases that really are not their strong suit either. And so I like how this film kind of shows their strengths and weaknesses as a couple, and their strengths and weaknesses as paranormal investigators. The film also does, pretty much for the most part, maintain the atmosphere of those first 2 films. So definitely that creepy, eerie feeling. Some of the music is even borrowed from those first 2 films at some points. Going down dark hallways, going into graveyards and forests. All that stuff feels like things that we saw in those first 2 Conjuring films, and they're continued here. And for the most part, obviously I'll go over some things in my negatives of why it doesn't work. But for the most part, atmosphere-wise, it works well in Conjuring 3 as well. I also thought the film also kind of depicts just how scary and how brave the Warrens were for these cases. Because there's times where, like I said, they got to listen to like a little boy say demonic things, and they have to see families in pain. And I think this film, even though we're several films in and they've taken on other cases like this before, we kind of get to see just how scary of a life and a career that Ed and Lorraine Warren had with all of this stuff, and just how all the stuff they had to witness over the course of their lives. And obviously, you could probably find this on YouTube somewhere, of this room that they actually have of artifacts and things that are from cases they took on, and they have to bless the room with a priest and everything every month. Of just all the things they had to go through that are just really creepy, and they had to be brave to do it. And it's just crazy to me that 2 people had to witness so much scary stuff while they were alive. And it was pretty cool that they were able to help a lot of people with these spirits and get rid of a lot of the spirits while they were being haunted by them. But for my negatives of The Conjuring 3, you can definitely tell James Wan did not come back to direct this film. This film is not directed by James Wan. He is working on a different horror film, I believe, and I believe that happened at the time this film was in development, so he had to choose one or the other. He chose that other horror film instead of this one. But as a result, the scares are not as effective as what he did in those first 2 films. And it just doesn't quite have the craft that he had in those first 2 Conjuring films either. You can definitely tell this director probably isn't as experienced at making good scares and things like that as much as he was. And that really goes to show, unfortunately, in this film. So I don't know if they just could have hired somebody maybe with a little bit more experience. Maybe they could have hired somebody that had more hits on their record or things like that, or at least had a couple of good horror films that they worked on over the past couple of years. I don't have a direct answer for this, but I did feel that some of the scares and the craft were not quite as worthy of what James Wan was able to do in those first 2 Conjuring films. I also thought a very underwhelming aspect of the film was the courtroom drama. They really don't show the actual court case in this movie very much, and unfortunately that's kind of a big part of the plot and the synopsis of the movie. They literally probably show them sitting down in the courtroom and things like that. They definitely tell you through subtitles and things of that nature of what happened in the court trial, but we don't really get to see much of the court trial itself. So I thought that aspect of the film was very underwhelming. Yeah, I get it. Maybe some people would have been bored by it and everything like that, but unfortunately when it's a part of your plot and synopsis of the film, you kind of have to show these things, even if it's not for very long. I think even an extra 15 minutes of this film focusing on courtroom stuff, I think would have definitely helped this film a lot. because as the way it stands now, it was a very underwhelming aspect of the plot for this movie. I also thought some of the musical score was very distracting in this movie. There's scenes where, for example, the older boy is now possessed by the demon, and they immediately cut to a scene where they're playing like rock music while he's dealing with the demon inside of him and things like that. And there's just a lot of creative choices that I just could have not have seen James Wan using if he directed this movie. And as a result, some of the aspects of the musical score were very distracting to me, and they just kind of don't fit with certain scenes. I also thought the overall third act was very weak in this film. I would even go so far as to say the third act kind of makes this ghost in this film feel weak and easy to take over and easy to take down. And I don't think that's what this film is trying to depict at all. It really just felt like we'll go through a painful moment here and there for a couple of minutes, but then the ghost will be gone. Um, and I don't know. It just I don't know if that's really how this event happened, but the way it was depicted on film, I thought was very very weak for the third act of the movie. But overall, I'm going to give The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It, an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good film. I think there's certainly great aspects about it. It's an interesting paranormal case. The real tape recordings showing during the end credits are very terrifying and scary. Ed and Lorraine Warren are very developed characters at this point, so they're very likable and very relatable at this point as well in the franchise. It does maintain the atmosphere of the first two films, and it really does depict just how scary of a career that Ed and Lorraine Warren had. But like I said, as a result, it just doesn't have the scares or the craft that James Wan had in those first two films. The courtroom drama is very underwhelming in this movie. The musical score has very distracting parts in this movie, and they really go kind of fit with what's going on in certain scenes. And the third act of this film is fortunately very weak in my opinion as well. So 8 out of 10 though, I think it is a good film. I think there's things to enjoy about it. I think it's even better than okay. I think calling it okay wouldn't give this film enough justice, but I think it's a good film. It's not quite as good as the first film, and in certain aspects it's not even quite as good as the second film either, but I think there's just enough here where I could recommend you to go see it. But go into this film knowing that it's not quite as good as that first Conjuring film, which to me, in my opinion, is the best in the franchise. And this film would have benefited from James Wan's involvement.